All right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and start right on time since we're streaming. It's great to see everybody here at 9 o'clock in the morning. I have a couple of announcements before we even begin this morning's session. So, first of all, I spent so much time on this slide that I really don't have a lot for you. But we'll go ahead and take it from there. So, it's great to see everybody, especially after a Tuesday night when all of the parties happen. So everybody's here bright and early on a Wednesday morning. I have a bunch of shirts that I'm going to be throwing out. Apologies to anybody in the back row or on the top, but I'll see if I can do my best oral Hershiser for you. Today we're going to talk about SharePoint 2016 for IT professionals. I'm Bill Baer. I'm a product manager in our SharePoint product group. I've been with SharePoint now for quite a while, almost a decade and a half. Prior to coming to Microsoft, I was with HP, Apple, and a number of different companies. That aside, let's go ahead and get right into content since we're going to try to start and end on time. Today we're going to talk about a number of different things related to SharePoint 2016 that haven't been covered throughout the duration of the week. We're going to talk about it in 4 separate topics. We're going to look at management. We're then going to talk about reliability, performance, and scale, some new investments that we're making around insights and data, and then we're going to talk about some of our cloud-accelerated experiences that we're building into SharePoint 2016. I should make a note that some of what you're going to see today is code that's complete. Some of which you're going to see today is things that we're working on or that we still endeavor to do with SharePoint 2016. Obviously, we're still a year out from our release, so there's still a lot of work ahead of us, but I do want to give you some insight into the way that we're thinking. So you're going to see some early things that we're working on as well. The build we're going to look at today is our 16.0.4021 1201 build, and it's actually smaller than most cumulative updates, which is awesome, and we're going to talk about why shortly. Moving forward, let's think about what SharePoint 2016 is. At Monday's keynote, The Evolution of SharePoint, we talked about how our on-premises releases over the course of SharePoint's history have always been the definition or the foundation for our cloud offering in Office 365. Now we've gained enough experience with SharePoint and we understand how to run the product at scale, we've looked to the cloud to determine what SharePoint 2016 will be. As such, from an IT perspective, we've got a lot of great things that are going to help you. We realized that operating SharePoint wasn't easy. We also realized that patching and updating SharePoint wasn't easy. We started to figure out a lot of things related to scale and management. So for us taking ownership of SharePoint and running it at scale as part of Office 365, we've been able to learn a lot and we've been able to fix a lot of things, particularly for our IT professional audience. So we'll talk a lot about those investments as we move forward. The way we built 2016 is effectively we took a point-in-time snapshot of our cloud offering, SharePoint Online. We took that and turned it into an on-premises release. We looked at it in 3 different ways. We identified what investments we've made in Office 365 can we accrue to our customers as a wholesale proposition. So we've brought a lot of those investments back to our on-premises release. For those investments we were unable to accrue back to on-premises as a wholesale proposition, we've invested in a number of cloud-accelerated experiences that we'll talk about today, or effectively new hybrid scenarios that we'll offer so you can take advantage of the innovation we have in Office 365. And then lastly, we looked at what new things can we do, what discrete investments can we make that differentiate SharePoint 2016 from SharePoint Online in Office 365. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the management investments that we've made with SharePoint. We'll start first on a couple of smaller items and work our way up the stack. So from a hardware requirements perspective, it remains a 64-bit application. We recommend anywhere from 16 to 24 gigabytes for a single server installation, or for farm installations anywhere from 12 to 16 gigabytes. From a processing perspective, compute doesn't necessarily change as opposed to what you've seen with SharePoint 2013. So a single quad-core processor should be enough to facilitate your need with SharePoint 2016. From a prerequisites perspective, we've made a number of different changes. We'll support Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows Server 10 with SharePoint 2016. It'll require the Windows Management Framework 3.0, which provides support for PowerShell 3.0. We'll add .NET Framework 4.5.2, unless, of course, you're running Win Server 10, where you'll require 4.5.6. We'll also continue to support the Windows Server App Fabric, which provides in-memory distributed caching for a number of different features, whether it's caching for social feeds or caching for login token cache or last modified time cache. So App Fabric remains a component of SharePoint 2016. I know back in April, the Windows Server team announced end of support for App Fabric as of next year. We'll continue to support it with SharePoint 2013, and we'll continue to support it with SharePoint 2016. So that doesn't affect our technologies that take a dependency on App Fabric either. We'll also require the Information Protection and Control Client. We do have some new DLP and information protection controls that we're building into SharePoint 2016, some of which will be offered through a hybrid experience. We'll talk a little bit at the end across some of those. And then lastly, WCF data services, so effectively enabling the creation and consumption of OData services. And that's particularly important when you think about data connectivity scenarios by virtue of BCS or new app scenarios that require identity. On the database side, we'll support the 64-bit edition of SQL Server 2014, along with Service Pack 1, or the 64-bit edition of SQL Server vNext. So effectively, we're stepping up our foundational software requirements for SharePoint 2016, one level from SharePoint 2013. From a deployment scenarios perspective, effectively nothing has necessarily changed considering SharePoint 2013 as a baseline. So you'll still have all of the same deployment scenarios available to you. We'll still continue to support for developer installations on domain controllers. The one thing that will change with SharePoint 2016 is standalone installations will no longer be supported. Effectively, those installations that use the built-in database engine or SQL Server Express edition. So those installations will no longer be supported. So a single server installation at this point in time will require installation of SharePoint 2016, and then you can install a SQL Server edition on the same box, standard, enterprise, developer, or data center editions. So that's one change from an installation perspective that you can expect to see in SharePoint 2016. From an upgrade perspective, you have a number of different ways that you can upgrade to SharePoint 2016. One is migration to 2016, and one is upgrade to 2016. From an upgrade perspective, we'll support upgrade from 2013 to 2016. We spent some time looking at what we call an N-2 upgrade, which is effectively attempting to allow our customers to upgrade directly from 2010 to 2016. And after we evaluated that scenario, we felt the best opportunity from our customers was to require 2013 as a stepping point for 2016. That was due to some substantial changes between the architecture in 2010 and the architecture in 2016. So we do want to provide an excellent upgrade experience for our customers. So we had to weigh our options, looking at, do we want to provide a path that enables you to skip 2013, or do we want to provide a great and reliable upgrade experience? The nice part about upgrade in 2016 is if you think about what 2016 represents, it represents the evolution of SharePoint Server 2013. So back in October of 2012, when we launched the new Office, or Office 365, we set 2013 as the baseline for our SharePoint Online offering. It effectively became the foundational build that drives SharePoint Online to this date. And we've incrementally updated it over time and made additive investments to differentiate it from SharePoint 2013. But at the end of the day, you can think of SharePoint 2013 as the genesis block for future versions of SharePoint. Much like Windows has a universal kernel that defines each release, SharePoint 2013 you can almost think of as the kernel for future versions of SharePoint. We learned a lot from SharePoint 2013. Again, it formed the foundation of SharePoint Online, so our expertise led us to be able to continue to incrementally update that particular version of SharePoint and define our 2016 release. So from an architecture perspective, there's parity between these releases. We're not changing the service application architecture to any extent, so you'll still have the same shared services architecture that you can expect and you've seen in SharePoint 2013. You'll have many of the same services available to you as well. One of the questions we commonly get asked by our customers who are in a TAP program that realize we've taken a point-in-time snapshot of our cloud-based offering to define our on-premises release is, what happens to those services that don't exist in SharePoint Online? For those services that don't exist, we backported those to ensure they remain available to you in SharePoint 2016. So for capabilities such as performance point services, we've brought those forward into 2016 by backporting them into the product itself. When you are upgrading to 2016, any 14.5 mode site collections need to be brought forward to 15 mode. So if you're running the backward compatible site collections in SharePoint 2013, effectively running them in SharePoint 2010 mode, you'll have to bring those site collections forward into 2013 mode before you can upgrade them to SharePoint 2016. Other than that, effectively, it's a database attach. It's the same upgrade that you've experienced in the past, where you're detaching your databases from 2013 and then reattaching those same databases to 2016. Now, optionally, you can also migrate to SharePoint 2016. Data migration can occur in a number of different ways. We've announced our new data migration pipeline. You'll learn more about that throughout the week. A number of our ISVs are already participating in leveraging the new pipeline and API to move data from point A to point B, or you can leverage a number of third-party solutions to migrate content. So you have two migration methodologies to choose from, which is you can upgrade by first upgrading 2010 site collections to 2013 and attaching your databases to 2016. Again, the upgrade is fairly painless. Again, because 2013 is the foundation for these releases, so there's effective parity from a schema perspective to enable you a smoother upgrade, and then beyond that, you can also migrate. On identity, we've made a few minor changes as well. So effectively, SAML authentication becomes a first-class citizen in SharePoint 2016. In 2013, we offered multiple authentication providers, so Windows claims, form-based authentication, SAML claims, WS-Fed, a number of different things were offered in SharePoint 2013 from an identity perspective. And the reason we had all of these providers was all about backwards compatibility. In SharePoint 2016, we're going to normalize on OAuth for SharePoint 2016, and SAML with WS-Fed is what's leading us there. So you can think about SAML authentication as a first-class citizen in SharePoint 2016. That has implications on BI scenarios that you were unable to do in the past because the remainder of the stack wasn't able to support SAML authentication. We chose SAML authentication as the default and first-class citizen for SharePoint 2016 because one authentication provider exists now, and that one authentication provider is claims ready or is cloud ready. SAML claims best suits this assertion because it enables you to make the cloud more transparent, particularly from an app dev perspective and a migration perspective. So the move to on-premises applications moves you in that direction. And then instead of the on-premises provider, apps will trust Active Directory now, or Azure Active Directory, as the identity provider. So effectively, what about Windows identity over SAML claims? So a lot of people ask us about that now that we're making SAML claims a first-class citizen. That remains supported as well. So we're not making a change to Windows identity over SAML claims. So although SharePoint is forward-looking from a SAML claims perspective, when we think about identity, we're going to continue to support some of the older identity models as well. But much like we did in 2013, where we started to deprecate classic identity, our move forward is moving away from domain-based authentication and moving closer to cloud-era authentication. So you can think about concepts and technologies such as OAuth and OpenID leading us forward. There will be apps that still rely on Windows identity, and SharePoint will still retrieve the Windows identity from SAML for those federated users. So we're going to continue to support your older authentication models, but we really want to move forward into a world of cloud-based identity. One of the other changes from an IT perspective is connection encryption. So in SharePoint 2013 and in SharePoint 2010, one of the things that you always had to do was leverage port 25 for any communications. Now we'll support Start TLS connection encryption. The reason we're doing that is if you think about older versions of SharePoint, when you're leveraging alerts and you're sending email, all of that was unencrypted. And now with SharePoint 2016, you can run on non-default ports which support encrypted communication between SharePoint and your messaging service. The great part about that is that encryption logic, and you can leverage non-default ports. So you're not relegated to just port 25 from leveraging SMTP with SharePoint 2016. So we've brought that forward as well in the interest of security. There is no fallback. So unless encryption is available, you won't be able to fall back to a non-encrypted connection. So if outbound encryption fails, it doesn't fall back. The key message is you can now run on non-default ports, and you can also use configurable, it's also configurable through central administration and or through PowerShell. And we'll take a look at Windows Central Administration in a little bit, and we'll show you some of these techniques. So from a performance and reliability perspective, we've made a number of changes as well. So that section concluded what we think of from a management perspective. So the way to think about upgrade is it is database attach, upgrade site collections to 15 mode if they're running in 14 mode or 14.5 mode, effectively SharePoint 2010 mode. From a hardware requirements perspective, or at least the prerequisite operating systems and database servers, the way to think about those is it's always the most current version that we support with SharePoint 2013 becomes the minimum version for SharePoint 2016. So for those just walking in the room right now, just to recap, you'll need to run Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows Server 10 in order to facilitate SharePoint 2016, .NET Framework 4.5.2 for Windows Server 2012 R2, or 4.5.6 for Windows Server 10. And some of the other management considerations, again, encrypted communications for outbound email, so we support non-default ports and start TLS. When you configure with Exchange, configurable over central administration and through Windows PowerShell. And then you cannot upgrade from SharePoint 2010 directly to 2016. You have to make the move to 2013 first. So with that said, let's move into some of the performance and reliability enhancements that we're making in SharePoint 2016. For those of you at the keynote, on Monday, we talked about a number of different things that we're doing from a roles perspective. So we've implemented a new way to think about topology by creating a new solution called MinRole. If you think about SharePoint 2013, it was representative of a vast array of different roles. And SharePoint was relatively agnostic as to what role it assumed within a server farm. You defined the role of SharePoint in a server farm by starting and stopping services or by provisioning service applications on a particular server. We had different levels of requirements for a variety of different roles. So if you look at our TechNet documentation, we effectively had about 4 different possible roles that SharePoint 2013 could facilitate. And within those 4 roles themselves, we had different requirements in terms of performance, what we needed from an I/O perspective on the storage subsystem, what we needed from a compute perspective on the front-end web servers. So from a roles perspective in 2013, we had what we called distributed cache and request management. For many of our customers, those effectively became 2 distinct or discrete servers. Sometimes it was many servers comprising a cluster, particularly for distributed cache and request management. We also had what we called a web server, but again, we laid down all the binaries and then you defined what that particular server became. Web servers could run anything from access services to business connectivity services. They could run the central administration website, user code services for sandbox solutions, stuff like Visio graphics. There was a number of different ways that you could take a web server and turn it into something else. We then had what we called batch processing servers just from a guidance perspective. So we had a crawl target, you had machines that ran machine translation service, perhaps Excel calculation services, Word automation, PowerPoint automation, just a number of different things that we considered batch processing. And then lastly, we had specialized workloads. So the foundation web apps, projects, search. But the key here is all of this was guidance. So SharePoint did have what we considered roles, but those roles were defined through documentation. In SharePoint 2016, we're defining those roles in code as opposed to documentation. So we've taken a lot of that guidance and we've effectively wrapped it into code. The way that we've done that is we've defined effectively 3 discrete roles for SharePoint 2016. We have a user role, and within a user role, user actions are maintained by that role. So if we look here, it's OneNote, user profile, Excel calculation services. The easy way to think about a user role is any request initiated by an end user is processed by that machine that is defined as a user role or a web server. So what we tried to do with SharePoint 2016 is in the past in SharePoint 2013, due to the flexible nature of roles in SharePoint, a user request could traverse the topology. So a user would make a request to SharePoint that's processed by a web server that goes to a batch processing or specialized server role to retrieve a workbook and process that workbook and then return it back to the front end, which subsequently responds to the user. So you can think about a user request that can traverse a number of different machines in a topology, which added latency to that end user's request. In SharePoint 2016, we wanted to address that latency and make SharePoint more performant and more responsive and more reliable. The more information we have about a role, if we have predictable installations, just from an updating perspective, we can provide updates to SharePoint and target those specific scenarios as opposed to guessing what a particular machine may look like. We also have a robot services role, which effectively is any request not initiated by an end user. So timer jobs, search indexing, provisioning. A lot of those actions that aren't end user initiated are processed by this robot services role. And we'll take a look at what those look like in a moment. So you can think about the way we're looking at SharePoint is an end user's request should be managed end to end by a single machine. Any request not initiated by an end user should be managed by a discrete role. And then lastly, we have a caching services role, which provides support for distributed cache. So the way that we've been thinking about SharePoint is let's improve performance, let's improve reliability, and the ways that we're doing that is by isolating requests to the machine responsible for processing that request, as opposed to allowing the request to traverse a topology. So you can think about all of this SharePoint logic consolidated into a single machine. So let's go ahead and take a couple of looks at what provisioning looks like from a min role perspective. So we're going to go ahead and pop over to a demo machine, and we're just going to jump onto a web front end. Some of you have seen this Monday. We're going to take another couple looks at it. So here we are on a Windows Server 2012 R2 machine. We're going to go ahead and open up the machine and move into the configuration wizard. And we're going to provision a new farm very quickly. So many of you have probably seen this screen, familiar with SharePoint 2013, 2010, and prior versions of SharePoint. So we'll specify our database server in this case. We'll leave the default name for the configuration database. We'll specify the service account for database access. In this case, it's my SharePoint service account. We'll authenticate to the database server and provide a passphrase for my farm. And then we get to a new screen which provides these roles for you. So let's take a look at the roles real quick. If we start at the very top, we have a specialized role. So in many cases, you may not want to elect to use our unit scale provisioning model or our min role provisioning model that provides consolidated logic. Perhaps you still want that level of flexibility available to you that you had in SharePoint 2013 and prior versions of SharePoint to provision your farms. So we haven't taken that option away from you. You select specialized role. And effectively what specialized role enables you to do is provision custom service applications and a number of other things. It provides the flexibility to do what you used to be able to do in SharePoint 2013. That agnostic, a SharePoint server is a SharePoint server, and whatever I provision on it defines what it becomes. So you can leverage the special load role. Generally, what the special load role is recommended for is third-party services or custom service applications. So if you're leveraging a third-party service that provides a custom service application within your shared services architecture, you can leverage the special role in order to accommodate that particular need. Moving through the list, we also have our web front end. And this is service applications and components are laid down on that particular machine to facilitate the role of a web server, responding to an end user's request end to end. So effectively, we auto-provision everything necessary for you to be able to provide support for an end user's request. Moving further in, we also have a search role. So this is service applications and components responsible for search indexing and crawling, so you can establish a search role. Now, if you think about SharePoint in the past, you used to just install SharePoint, run psconfig, you would start the search service, you would provision the search service application on that particular machine or one or more machines to create a topology. But effectively, it was just one installation, and then it was a number of clicks for you to define what it became. In this case, you select the search role, and it becomes a search server programmatically for you. So again, it's putting guidance into code. We have an application server role, so any service applications that serve back-end requests, this is the robot services role. So the web front-end role you can think of as the user services role. The application role is the robot services role that we looked at in the PowerPoint presentation a moment ago. And then lastly, we have the distributed cache role. The three primary roles are here on the bottom, and then we have the specialized role for custom service applications, perhaps those provided by a third party or those developed in-house. And then lastly, we have single server farm. Now, the important thing to remember about single server farm is it does not include SQL Server Express. So for those that came in late, we no longer support the standalone installation of SharePoint with SharePoint 2016. In SharePoint 2013 and earlier versions, you could install a standalone installation, which would install with SQL Server Express, or even if you were on older versions of SharePoint, it would use MSDE. Those options are no longer supported with SharePoint 2016. So if you elect the single server farm, what you end up with is SharePoint binaries that are laid down on the machine in their entirety, and then you have to connect to a database server that's installed on that same machine. So for this particular example, I would use single server because I've already provisioned SQL Server on this same machine. So you could use standard, enterprise, developer, and/or data center editions. You can use those editions of SharePoint to have that single server machine effect. So what we're going to do is bear with me for a moment because I am going to take another snapshot of this machine so we can look at another couple of concepts before we move on. So back to the PowerPoint. Min role services. So again, web front end services end user requests, optimized for low latency. So the min role server is optimized for low latency in order to provide responsiveness for your end users. The application server role, again, back-end jobs that are triggered by another service, such as search. Servers assigned for this role are optimized for high throughput. So the way that we think about these particular roles is the web front end, optimized for latency, the application servers, optimized for high throughput, the specialized role, if you want to isolate a server from other services, custom third-party applications or service applications, and then lastly, the distributed cache role. So those are effectively load balancing end user requests for those various services that require the cache, such as social feeds, login token cache, last modified time cache. So it's optimized to process those requests. So through these levels of optimization, we can actually respond very quickly to an end user's request because SharePoint is intelligent in how to actually manage the request end to end, as opposed to in the past when we used to traverse the topology in order to facilitate a request from an end user. From a min role perspective, you can also use psconfig through the command line or through Windows PowerShell. So many of you do programmatic installations. You don't leverage the wizard itself. We have a new override that you can use for that as well. So effectively, you're just going to specify a new parameter called isLocalServerRole, and then you specify what that role is. And again, that role could be web front-end, application, specialized load, or distributed cache. So for those of you building automation tools or like to automate your deployments, you can still do that because we've accommodated that through PowerShell as well as psconfig in the command line. So from a role enforcement and health perspective, what ensures SharePoint remains what we've defined it to be? So if you've selected web server, what do we do to ensure it remains a web server? So we've built in a new health analyzer in order to detect any deviation away from what we've defined that role to be. And we'll take a look at what that looks like in a moment. In this example here, what you see is we've assigned a role to this server. If you look at the action, you can enable auto provisioning to programmatically provision those particular services once a role's been defined. So in this case, what we've defined is a specialized load role. So if I wanted to start the request management, I could enable auto provision for those particular services. In the past, you would start something like the managed metadata web service. You would then go out and provision the managed metadata service by specifying the database connection, by creating your term store database, and then provisioning your service application after creating your application pools and all the necessary prerequisites to building a service application. In our new min role topology, you can effectively auto provision a number of these things, providing that you've already assigned a server role. So you can go old school and use the specialized load role. Once you've done that, You can provision SharePoint in a way that you have in the past, much like 2013 or earlier versions, or you can leverage our new min role topology that optimizes for you and provides the recommended services for a particular rule. The health rules, they run in the server farm each day, so it's a daily rule. It scans everything except for special load. So as soon as you select special load, effectively it doesn't participate in any of the health or enforcement rules that we've built around the min role topology, because we just assume that you're gonna run in a manner that's unique to your business needs, much as you would with SharePoint 2013. It also compares the service instances to what we expect them to be. So from a min role topology, we have expectations of what a server should be, front-end application role, distributed cache role, whatever it may be. So we do a comparison to ensure that you're actually compliant with our topologies. So I'm gonna go ahead and give my machine a second to boot up, but any questions so far on min role? Quick question over here. Go ahead and step to the mic.
The switch for PowerShell when doing min role.
Right.
Is that part of the new SP configuration database, or is that a new commandlet, or how does that work?
So from a PowerShell perspective, when you're programmatically provisioning SharePoint, and we know that's a thing that a lot of our customers like to do. Many of our customers have many SharePoint farms. Perhaps you want to replicate a production configuration in a user testing environment, a UAT environment, or a PPE environment. So you have pre-production environments or even development needs to where you want parity between what your developers build on and what your production users see. So for those cases, it's the same set of, say, PS config command line options. We just have a new switch called is local server role, and you specify the role name. Same with PowerShell. If you're using PowerShell to programmatically provision, it's the same thing. You're gonna just leverage a switch called is server role, and then you're gonna specify that particular server role in order to provision your environment. I know we had one question over here.
You mentioned there's a health analyzer, but can you have several rules for one server? For example, you can be application and distributed cache in one server.
Right. So if you wanted to have multiple roles assigned to a particular server, such as the application server role and a web front-end role, in that particular case, what you would want to do is choose the specialized load, or optionally, if it's just a small farm, a single server role. So what our provisioning does is it lays down the services necessary to facilitate that role and only that role. So it's not a multi-select, it's in either or. But you can still do the same things you did in the past. So if you want this particular machine to serve multiple roles, you would use special load and leverage it that way. But then it won't participate, again, in any of our health analyzer rules. So for participation in monitoring, you would have to leverage one of the roles that we've defined so we can do the comparative analysis versus what we expect to see.
Thanks.
So I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can bring up a few things on my screen here. And as soon as that comes up, we'll switch to another demo and take a look at what our min role topology looks like from a health enforcement perspective. So the key message here is one of the things that we've wanted to be able to do was just make SharePoint easier to operate and allow you to scale from a unit-based perspective. So in the past, scaling was a difficult exercise with SharePoint. It was scaling horizontally, it was scaling vertically. It was very difficult to scale SharePoint, and largely because of the flexibility you had in the way that you manage services and service applications as part of a SharePoint farm. With our new min role topology, you're able to scale on a unit basis very easily because you can simply define a role. The server assumes that role when you join it to the farm, and you're up and running. So it's no longer provisioning a server or looking at a server and trying to identify what it is once it's added to a farm. It actually just becomes part of that farm in its necessary role. So let's go ahead real quick and we'll switch over to central administration in SharePoint 2016. The look and feel of central administration isn't going to substantially change versus what you've seen in SharePoint 2013. The look and feel of central administration from what you see here to what you may see when we release the product may change, but we're effectively not going to change the UI to any extent that will differentiate it from SharePoint 2013 or any earlier versions of SharePoint. This particular build of SharePoint is about 8 days old, so it doesn't have a lot of our UI investments yet. Generally, the way that we think about the product is we focus on those core infrastructure needs as we begin to build a product, and largely those infrastructure needs are those needs that represent what our IT professionals can expect before we move into the phases to where we work on the user experiences. So here we are in central administration. I can actually now go to manage servers in a server farm. Now, as you can see, this looks a little bit different from what you can expect in a managed servers in a server farm compared to SharePoint 2013. We have some new things here in the screen. So in the past, you used to have server, product installed, perhaps the service is running. Those were the three things that you looked at when you managed servers in a server farm via SharePoint 2013 central administration. In SharePoint 2016, what you can see is we have some new columns available to you. One is the role. So in this case, as I said earlier, I provisioned this as a single server role, which means I had a database on that particular machine. I installed SQL Server Data Center Edition and then installed SharePoint as a single server role. So as you can see, the role's been defined in the third column. In the fourth column, you can see in compliance. And then you can also see services running. So in this particular case, the health analyzer rule ran against my single server farm and detected I was out of compliance. The reason I was out of compliance is within a single server farm, it provisions a specialized set of services to facilitate what a single server farm should be. So it has expectations. In this case, I provisioned a number of additional service applications which brought it out of compliance. So when I say it does comparative analysis, in code we've already identified what a single server farm should look like, what a web front end, what an application server, what a caching server should look like in code. That code runs and does comparative analysis between what's running on my server and what do we expect in code. So in this case, we detected we had some specialized services outside of what we expect. Search. So we have a new search server role. In this case, I selected single server, but then I provisioned the search server role as well. So I fell out of compliance. And you can see now that I have a new fix button to where I can actually resolve that. So I can programmatically resolve a server as well. So if this was a web front end and there was a number of individuals who had access to central administration and they decided to provision something that brought the server outside of its role and I wanted to bring it back into compliance, I could definitely do so by selecting the Fix button. It's going to do a little bit of work, and it's going to come back, and it's going to resolve those issues for me as well. Now, we're going to come back to these demonstrations in a little bit, but let's go ahead and move forward throughout the presentation. So this was in case my demo failed, so let's go ahead and move through that, but our demo was successful. Another thing we'd like to talk about is patching. So on Monday morning, we talked about how we think of patching differently with SharePoint 2016 as opposed to SharePoint 2013. And we've got some exciting news related to SharePoint 2016 as well. So in the past with SharePoint, an update was defined by a number of different QFEs. And those QFEs represented a number of different MSIs and MSPs, so installer packages and the packages themselves. For a general SharePoint update in SharePoint 2013, by default, you can expect about 37 MSIs and MSPs as part of an update, and then in addition to that, about another 18 more for each individual language pack installed on a particular server. So if you think about the number of patches that are contained within an update, just out of the box, you're going to get 37. As soon as you have language packs, you get another 18 more. So for each language pack, another 18. So if you have 10 language packs, you're looking at 180 MSIs and MSPs in addition to that 37 that are laid down by default. In SharePoint 2016, we're doing a number of things in regards to patching to minimize the size of a patch and its footprint by reducing the number of MSIs and MSPs down to 2 MSIs and MSPs per patch in addition to 1 per language pack. So from 18 to 1, and from effectively 47 down, or 37 down to 4. So what does that mean from an IT perspective? One, the patch is smaller. It's got a smaller footprint, which leads to optimize performance. And as I mentioned on Monday, in many cases, you'd find updates that were larger than SharePoint itself when you installed it. Now updates are smaller, which means they execute faster, and they execute with zero downtime. So in Office 365, as part of SharePoint Online, we have to maintain a level of reliability adhering to a 3.9 SLA for our customers. And a number of our customers running SharePoint on-prem have always asked us, how do you maintain 3.9 availability with SharePoint? Because we're unable to do the same as part of our on-premises topologies. And the reason is because we orchestrate our updates in a different way than what an on-premises customer would orchestrate their updates in. One, we've leveraged this new design to have a smaller update footprint. We've reduced the number of MSIs and MSPs, and then we're allowing in-place online installations. So when you think about build-to-build upgrades are now an online operation that provides zero downtime. So you can install your patches now in the middle of the day, completely transparent to your users, because all of our upgraders run online. In the past, all of our upgraders ran offline, which meant we were constantly starting and stopping services, which resulted in downtime within your SharePoint farm. So no longer do you require these complex, high availability environments in order to just facilitate a patch. One of the other problems with patches is we used to run into a lot of regressions as part of our patching exercise. Many of those are probably familiar with that anyway. The reason is because when we develop a patch, we test across all of those QFEs that are representative of what an update is. And then when a customer installs that particular update may not touch each of the services that that patch is designed for. So we've tested across all of them, but only a subset of them may be applicable to a given customer. That's what we call entropy. So entropy in thermodynamics, it's the second law of thermodynamics, but it's effectively the number of different ways that a thermodynamic system can be arranged. In our case, we test across all of those particular updates. So if we look at this ice cube tray here, the expectation is that we've tested across all of these. But the customer may only have the 4 lit ice cubes applicable to their environment. So that's a scenario we haven't tested. That's what we call entropy, or the number of different ways a system can be arranged. We had an expectation of an arrangement that looked like this, but from a customer perspective, when we laid it down, it may look like this. That's what led to a lot of the challenges and a lot of regressions. So by reducing the number of patches, we reduce entropy, because we've reduced the number of different ways a system can be arranged in any particular manner, which allows us to test across them in a way that's more reliable, that provides customers a better experience. The other thing that we tend to have is what we call atrophy. And atrophy is the wasting away of systems. So in this case, for us, this new patch methodology, the way that we orchestrate patching, reduces entropy because the number of ways a system can be arranged are minimized, both through min-roll topologies as well as our new patching logic. But then we also reduce atrophy on our customers because now we don't have patches that are wasting away as part of the installation itself. So the key message here, which is going to be exciting for our audience, is that now we have zero downtime patching that is substantially smaller than what you've been able to see in the past. So we at least deserve a round of applause for that investment right there. And for you up front, I'm going to go ahead and give you my ice cubes because I don't need them anymore. So there's your first SharePoint 2016 patch delivered to a customer. So moving on, one of the other things that we've been able to do is distributed cache. So from a 3.9 availability perspective, for some of you that may have been able to achieve that through creative methods, whether that's log shipping or leveraging SQL Server and always-on availability groups, either asynchronous or synchronous processing, there's been a number of different ways that you could try to facilitate minimizing downtime, but you were never able to achieve true zero downtime as you'll be able to in SharePoint 2016. So min-roll, our new patching methodology, are two things that step us up to you being able to offer 3.9s or better availability to your own internal users, but we've also made changes with the distributed cache. So from a distributed cache perspective, there were a number of different things that resulted in your inability to maintain a 3.9s or 4.9s SLA. Now with the distributed cache, you can actually move up to a 4.9s SLA. The reason is because we introduced a new feature which switches NTLM authentication between SharePoint and the cache cluster instead of relying on encryption of the cache before transport. Basically what all of that means is we do a transformational exercise to resolve the NTLM authentication problem that occurs between SharePoint and the cache cluster. That is what caused a lot of the downtime with distributed cache. That goes away because we've introduced a new feature to resolve that particular issue. So that gets easier in itself as well. And now you can offer 4 nines availability from a distributed cache perspective, but not only that, in addition, you can also support more connections as well. So all of the tuning guidance that we used to have for App Fabric caching, unfortunately, never really worked with on-premises just due to authentication overhead. And this new feature mitigates all of that authentication overhead to allow you to better scale distributed cache, and it also allows better reliability from a distributed cache perspective. And if you think about what used to happen compared to what happens today, so like I said, we had a feature which switches off NTLM authentication, and then we rely on an encrypted connection, whereas in the past we noticed under high load the cluster would start getting unresponsive just due to authentication overload. So every time somebody made a request, we had to authenticate against Active Directory in order to facilitate that request. So that was the authentication overhead we experienced in the past. So now we don't do that switching because of our new transport layer that we've enabled per feature. So what about SharePoint boundaries and limits? From a content database sizing perspective, we haven't yet identified exactly what that will be. Again, SharePoint's about a year away, but we do want to increase the limits representative of the way that we've been able to run SharePoint as a component of Office 365. So we'll likely support contents that scale into the terabytes as opposed to the gigabytes that you see today. We live in a new world where SD cards can facilitate a 200 gigabyte database. We should increase our limits to terabytes, more representative of what we see the way we run the service. From a site collection per content database perspective, come on, give me a round of applause on that one. That's well over 5 times what you've been able to see with SharePoint 2013. And comparatively to SharePoint 2010 and earlier versions, that's substantially more. Your topology, your footprint are going to get a lot smaller just due to some of these investments. We're increasing that list threshold you love so much well beyond 5,000 as well. Max file size, you can now upload 10 gig files to SharePoint, so you're no longer relegated to 2 gigabytes. So all of those AutoCAD files that you want to be able to upload, those engineering diagrams, you can upload those, and in some cases it's just people with MP3s that they want to store inside of SharePoint, because of course those are collaborative documents that you need inside of SharePoint. And then from an indexed items perspective, search increases 2 times. So you can actually index across over 500 million items with search now as well. And that's just a first start from a SharePoint perspective of where we're going with SharePoint. So scalability is going to be important to us. Like I said, today we're very early in the development phases of SharePoint 2016, but we've already identified 5 key things that we can improve that have been customer pain points. So for all of you that have been completing recommendations for us or feedback for us in user voice, we've taken a lot of those and we've already transformed those into code and built those in the product. So definitely keep the feedback coming to us. So what about performance? We said the file sizes are getting bigger, so the next question is but I need to be able to upload that 10 gigabyte file in an efficient manner. So in earlier versions of SharePoint, in SharePoint 2010, we introduced what we called the Cobalt protocol. The Cobalt protocol is a code name for Microsoft File Synchronization via SOAP over HTTP, or FSS HTTP. And effectively, what that particular protocol was designed for was to mitigate latency between a client and a web server. So when a user uploaded a document or they were saving a document by virtue of an Office application or even the sync client at that particular time, it would implement the Cobalt protocol. So a user would request a document from SharePoint. SharePoint would subsequently go to SQL Server to retrieve the document. The document would then be presented to the end user by virtue of the client or the browser. The user would then update said document. So what SharePoint would do under Cobalt in 2010, it would only send the delta, the change itself, between the client and the web server. The web server would then request a full copy of the file or the SQL server, the web server would request the full copy of the file from the SQL server. The SQL server would provide it to the web server. The web server would then merge the complete file with the change and send it back to the database. So as you can see with Cobalt and SharePoint 2010, you ended up with a number of reads and a number of writes associated with just updating a file. Now, while client-server bandwidth was resolved and we've mitigated latency because we've only sent the delta between the client and the web server, all of that latency was just passed on to the web server and the database server itself, which increased load and increased the amount of I/O you needed to facilitate a request. In 2013, we further evolved file synchronization via SOAP over HTTP by introducing shredded storage. Shredded storage would then take the delta from the front end to the back end. So we mitigated that particular performance challenge with SharePoint 2013. In SharePoint 2016, we're moving away from file synchronization via SOAP over HTTP and taking a dependency on more proprietary protocols for upload and download chunking to improve performance by leveraging bits or background intelligent transfer service. So that's going to be the new methodology that we use to accommodate file uploads from an upload and download chunking perspective. So when we increase the file size, we also have to increase performance. So we're moving to a protocol that's more representative of being able to accommodate that. We're also introducing what we call fast site creation. So if you think about a way a site is created today, when you create site collections for your customers or your users, many organizations like to programmatically provision those particular site collections, either through PowerShell or through a help desk request. So end users generally aren't enabled access to self-service site creation in most organizations that we see today. And if they are, one of the challenges with SharePoint is site creation is a heavy operation. The reason it is because every time we create a site, there's a number of different things that we have to do. One, we have to work through all of the provisioning logic, all of the feature activation, and eventually it results in a site collection. As you can see in Office 365, site collection is a fairly small and rapid operation. We're able to provision sites rapidly. The reason we do is with fast site creation, we effectively copy site collections using the SP site copy method at the content database level. So what does that mean? You can think of a base site collection such as the team site template being a template in itself within the database. When a user requests a site for provisioning, we simply implement a copy command at the database level to move that template over. So effectively, we're just adding new rows to a database, bypassing all of the feature activation because our master copy has all of those implemented already. So effectively, we have master copies of site collections that become the foundation for any subsequent site collection. So none of the feature activation occurs as part of site collection creation. So you can very rapidly enable fast site creation for your users because we simply do an SP site copy at the database level. So we're just moving rows from point A to point B to instantiate new sites, as opposed to running it through code and performing a lot of feature activation. One of the things that we're looking at that we're still working to see if we can deliver is what we call traffic management. It's something that we do in SharePoint Online and Office 365, which increases SharePoint's availability to 4 nines. You're already going to have 3 to 4 nines availability just through MinRoll, just through our new updating logic, through fast site creation, through new scalability boundaries and a number of investments that we're making in SharePoint 2016. But we're also looking to bring a lot of the things that we understand from our experience running SharePoint in the service back to on-premises. So this is representative of one of the things that we're looking at that we haven't yet committed to bring to SharePoint 2016, but we do want to talk about to let you know how we're thinking about the product. So basically what traffic management is we have a new endpoint that runs on our web front ends. It establishes affinity between that front end and a particular load balancer. In this case, it could be a big IP device. It could be even NLB, but effectively it provides affinity between the two. And then it can isolate requests as well. So it provides intelligent routing based on a number of different variables. So what we do is we remotely verify health, and then we can initialize any remediation and then provide scenarios for like conditional access scenarios, for read-only scenarios. So effectively, you can think of it as an intelligent transport layer that can actually drive a user request throughout the topology. So this is one of the things that we're looking at bringing to our on-premises customers as well, that we've explicitly built to facilitate our SharePoint Online offering. But the way you can think about it is intelligent rules that sit inside of SharePoint that can actually take a request and respond to it in a way that verifies server health and servicing before it actually processes it. So sending a request to servers that have the most capacity to respond to that request, or moving a request to another server in the event that you need read-only or some kind of conditional access. One of the other things that we're doing from a user profile perspective is we're no longer baking the user profile service into SharePoint. The user profile service actually is provided in a way that the only option you have available to you when you install is Active Directory synchronization. So the old SharePoint 2007 way that you used to be able to do import. So for unidirectional import scenarios, you would leverage Active Directory synchronization as part of SharePoint 2016, or you would select external replication by virtue of installing Identity Manager on a separate machine. So in the past, in SharePoint 2013, we used to build Forefront Identity Manager into the product to enable bidirectional synchronization. We're no longer building it into SharePoint. We're enabling you to install it on a completely separate server and then interop with SharePoint. So that improves the reliability of the user profile service. From a project, thank you. I don't know why everybody's so excited about that, because there was never any problems with the user profile service that I'm familiar with. So from a project server perspective, we're consolidating our project server databases into the SharePoint content database, so that's a substantial change as well. Again, one of those things that we're trying to do to reduce the footprint and more predictably service your SharePoint environments on your behalf by consolidating project and SharePoint project databases and SharePoint content databases into one unique database now. So it brings project closer to the project and portfolio managers, and it brings project closer to SharePoint. So effectively, we're consolidating those databases. That doesn't mean with SharePoint 2016 you get project server for free. You still have to license project server as well. We're also introducing what we call durable links. What durable links enable you to do is we want to make sure that sharing's a truly frictionless experience. In earlier versions of SharePoint, if you shared out a file and then renamed the file or moved the file to another location, the link was broken. Durable links resolve that because it's all resource ID based URLs. So we use a Cobalt endpoint for getting the file for the client. The URL, it contains the site ID and the document ID, so it's all about resource endpoints. So when you upload a file and you elect to share it, it creates a link. That link has a resource ID embedded within it that identifies that particular file and has an affinity to that file, and that affinity is regardless of whether or not that file's been renamed or moved. So if you share a file with somebody in SharePoint 2016 and you move it between site collection A and site collection B, the link that you've provided to them still works. If you take that file and rename it, so. One of the other things is, let's say you take a file and you decide to rename it. So you've been working on a file over the last several weeks, and that file's name is sample document draft. And at some point, sample document draft is actually going to become a document that you want to share more broadly with your organization. When you rename that document from sample document draft to sample document, the link doesn't change. So effectively, no matter what a file name is, no matter where a file resides, and no matter how many times you move that particular file, because we've based it on a resource ID that has an affinity with the actual document, it doesn't matter what the URL is or where that file may live. So you can move it as much as you want. Now, in the interest of time, because I can see we're moving along and we're about 16 minutes left, I want to talk about some work that we're going to do on insights and data that we endeavor to do. So this is another thing that we're looking to be able to do for our customers, because we, again, have a lot of experience now running SharePoint. And the one thing that we've learned is we need more insight into how users are leveraging SharePoint. So how frequently do our users run into a 404 when they're accessing a particular site or accessing a particular document or document library? How fast are those requests on a general nature? How much latency are they experiencing? Which sites have greater latency than other sites? Which documents are more frequently accessed than other documents? So throughout the course of us building SharePoint Online, we've needed to understand a lot of the ways that user actions occur against our environment to effectively plan scale, but to further resolve any issues that may occur. So we're doing some work to offer some advanced telemetry with SharePoint 2016. So this is one of those things that we're looking at right now, and we haven't gotten to a point to where we're code complete, but I want to show you some examples of how we do it so you can anticipate how you may be able to do it in the future. So we're going to go ahead and flip over to a quick demo, and I'll show you a quick way, the way that we look at telemetry. So let me go ahead and minimize central administration as soon as we can get the demo machine to show up eventually. Come on, give them a round of applause. All right, we're rebooting. This is obviously not running SharePoint 2016 because he's rebooting the machine because they installed a service pack. So we'll go ahead and wait for this machine to come up, and then we're going to take a look at some of this telemetry that you can expect us to be working on for SharePoint 2016. But again, through our experience running SharePoint, we need to understand the way that the users use it for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is if you think about stuff like A/B testing. We do a lot of that as part of our service. What particular features work for our users? What particular features work better if we do something different? In SharePoint Online, you may have noticed that the controls for sharing and managing documents, we've moved those from the bottom of a document library to the top of a document library. The reason we did that is because we saw an increase in uploads and an increase of users working with documents when we started to move those from the bottom of a document library to the top of a document library. So that was representative of some of the insights that we were able to be able to understand as part of our offering in SharePoint Online. So we have a new enhanced usage database that we use, and we have this new API that we call the SharePoint Logging API, or what we call SLAPI. And what we use SLAPI for is to figure out how our customers are using SharePoint so we can better provide a better responsive environment, but yet better features as well. So this is an example of some of the telemetry that we're able to capture that's looking at a demo tenant of mine. And this uses some of these new logging APIs, or these SLAPI APIs that we've built. So we've been able to take something like SLAPI and then create a set of dashboards for us to understand how individuals are working across content. So again, this is one of those things that we're working on that I want to be able to show you. So as you can see here, in this case, I can monitor daily active users. So it looks like my demo tenant isn't that frequently accessed. I can also see my weekly active users. So I had a good day on August 4th of 2013, and then it starts to go a little downhill from there. So these are all leveraging this new enhanced usage database that we have in store for SharePoint 2016, one of the things that we endeavor to deliver. So we have a usage database today. That usage database gives you some information about feature usage, and it generally just gives you a GUID, and then you have to map that GUID to something else to try to figure out what particular features are used, and it generates a table, and then you work through that table to try to figure it out. One of the things that we want to be able to do that we're looking at is how we can deliver the new enhanced usage to our on-premises customers, but then build a set of reports for you that you're able to leverage as well. I can also come down and I can look at a number of different variables. So what kind of browsers have my users been using over the course of the last month? So in this case, IE10 and IE11 are the top browsers. I can also move across and look at user agents, and then I can see usage by operating system. Now, if I wanted to dig a little bit deeper in, I could also look at storage. So what does storage consumption look like? It's going to show me my daily storage, my storage breakout, as well as what file types are representative of storage being utilized as part of this particular SharePoint environment. I can also see storage by site template. So really, what site templates are resonating with my users? So at first, it's good for a number of different things. It helps you predictively figure out how storage is being consumed as part of your SharePoint environment, but at the same time, you can figure out what features are really resonating with your customers or your users. So in this case, personal sites seem to be the most popular landing spot for content within my environment, followed by team sites. Moving our way down, The video portal is obviously leveraged, but we have some that are more infrequently used than others. So it can help me from an adoption perspective because perhaps I want my users to be using groups or the app catalog site. So I can start to look at these as adoption metrics to try to figure out how to get my users to become more engaged with those particular site templates. Or perhaps I want to retire those because they're not compelling to my users and I just want to simplify what's presented to them. I can also look at the storage breakout and I can work my way across, and then I can move down and look at total daily storage. So it provides some growth trends to where I can figure out how to anticipate storage planning for the future and move forward that way. And with 10 gigabyte document uploads, obviously you need to plan for storage. I can look at a number of different things like performance. I can also work my way across health. So in this case, I can look at my farm's availability. I can look at a number of different daily errors in that case to determine whether or not my farm is performant and responsive the way I want it to be, meeting my 3 nines, 4 nines, or 5 nines SLA, whatever my organization's dictated. So I can actually work my way across and look at some of these trends. I can work my way across performance. Perhaps I'm interested in what disk I/O and compute look like. So all of this is based on these new logging concepts that we have built as part of SharePoint Online. And again, the way that we think about SharePoint 2016 is many of the experiences you see in SharePoint Online will accrue back to our customers. So many of the new immersive profile investments that we've made inside of SharePoint Online will accrue back to our customers. Many of the investments we've made around sharing and moving the Chrome for sharing and a lot of the things that we've done with the Chrome accrue back to our customers. And then again, for those things that don't accrue back to our customers, how do we endeavor to do those through hybrid implementations or cloud accelerated implementations? Examples of which are like the Office Graph. Many of our customers want to leverage that. So how do we enable you to wire into the Office Graph, leveraging your on-premises content or your content across on-premises and online? One of the other changes is you can now do open document format and document libraries in SharePoint 2016. So you can actually create new files and document libraries and save them as ODFs by creating an ODF as a template. So you can edit with any program of your choice. So that's new to 2016. It's one of those things that we built explicitly for our online offering, and now we're going to speed up the pace a little bit so we can talk about some of our cloud accelerated experiences. So from a compliance perspective, we're doing a number of different things in compliance explicitly designed for SharePoint 2016. An example of which is this concept of classification IDs. What a classification ID can be thought of is a discrete representation of a particular piece of IP. To give you an example, in many cases, many compliance tools, when you try to discover something like a credit card number, it's a simple regular expression. It's discovering a series of 4 digits separated by a dash, 4 digits, dash, 4 digits. What classifications IDs do is it's an easy way to think of a complex query based on complex predicates. So from a classification ID perspective, we have a thing called a credit card classification ID. And again, it's a complex predicate. So what it is we look for corroborating evidence as well. So you're looking for 4 digits dash, 4 digits dash, 4 digits dash, but in addition, we look for something that corroborates that fact that it may be a credit card number. So we look for something like expiration ID. So you can think of it as adding more information to a particular query from an e-discovery perspective. We're going to have about 51 of those out of the box for SharePoint 2016. Classification IDs for common things like credit card number, social security number, German passport number, German driver's license number. A number of different things will come to SharePoint 2016 as out-of-the-box classification IDs for e-discovery. We're also implementing some new hybrid investments for those customers who may have information distributed across online and on-premises. So inside of Office 365, you're able to do a number of different things. Document fingerprinting. You're able to do things like item level encryption. So why not bring those capabilities back to our on-premises customers through hybrid connectivity? So we have a new unified compliance center in Office 365 that's inclusive of all of your Office 365 properties, Exchange, Skype for Business, and SharePoint. That provides a single pane of glass for compliance across products that you've subscribed to. Our new hybrid opportunity enables you to leverage this unified compliance console that includes on-premises content and environments as well. So you can subscribe to cloud capabilities like Azure Active Directory RMS to leverage per item encryption for your SharePoint environment on premises as well as online. So this is an example of enabling you to subscribe to some of our capabilities in the cloud while maintaining your content on premises. You can also do in-place discovery and preservation with SharePoint 2016 on premises, both across your on-prem and your online data as well. For hybrid scenarios, e-discovery works across both on-prem and online content, so you're no longer relegated to just e-discovery across your on-prem content alone. On Monday, we looked at the new cloud search service application, which will initially ship later this year as an update to 2013, but we'll also ship it inside of SharePoint 2016, which enables you to leverage the power of the Office graph with your on-premises content. So the way this particular scenario works is we have a new service application that will ship again as an update later this year to 2013, as well as building it in natively to 2016. That unifies your search index in the cloud and then enables you to search across it, retrieving a blended result set that you can perform ranking and filtering and analysis of as if it were a single entity as opposed to two separate result blocks. So it effectively unifies your index to where you have one search to rule them all across both on-prem and online content, but in addition, it brings the power of Delve and the Office graph to you on premises. So we don't ship the Office graph or Delve on premises, but we enable you to leverage its capabilities through these new search services. So for those that didn't see it on Monday, we'll go ahead and take a quick look of what that looks like. And that's fantastic that the machine didn't reboot on me. So we'll go ahead and go into a cloud search. So in this case, I'm going to search from cloud back to on-premises. I could just as easily do on-prem to cloud. So on Monday, we searched for Contoso Pharmaceuticals. So we'll search across Contoso Pharmaceuticals. As you can see, I have documents that are stored on premises. So if we look at the URL, it's an intranet site. HTTP Office is one of our intranet portals. And then if I move up, you can see that I have a document that is stored in the cloud about Contoso usage and proposal for humongous insurance. In the past, these would be two separate result blocks with hybrid search because it's federated query. You effectively execute a query from cloud or on-prem, and it splits and it hits each environment, and then you have two separate result blocks. Each result block would have to be filtered independently. In this case, if I wanted to, I could filter by author, and it's going to filter both cloud and on-premises data at the same time and provide relevance to that author. Now that in itself is a great experience, but how does that work with Delve? In this case, we're leveraging the new cloud search service application. So if I go to my Contoso Pharmaceuticals board, as you remember, we had about Contoso usage and proposal for humongous insurance. Both of those are now available through Delve, both the on-premises and the online content. So I can add on-prem content to a board, or I could add online content to a board. So now I have an experience that's powered by Delve that exposes my on-premises content as well because we have an index that's been unified in Office 365. So moving real quick back, in interest of time, we also have a new extranet scenario as part of our hybrid offering that we're working on. We know extranets are a complex scenario for our on-premises customers, particularly if you haven't implemented an extranet for other technologies. So many cases our customers have SharePoint, and SharePoint is their information vehicle for sharing across both internal and external users. But the cost and expense of not only implementing an extranet, but the experience necessary to implement capabilities such as ADFS may not exist in that organization, or may just be too costly to explicitly design for on-premises. So we're enabling a new extranet hybrid scenario to mitigate that for you and your customers so you can easily share your information with external parties without the need of implementing a complex extranet by leveraging the power of what we've already been able to do inside of Office 365. From a team sites perspective, we're doing work around team sites to enable hybrid team sites. So a great example of which is today from a team sites perspective, when you follow a document on-prem, that experience is discretely related to on-prem. Any document you follow in online has no affinity to your profile. So some of the work we want to be able to do is be inclusive of both on-prem and online content. So when you follow a site or you follow a document or an individual on-prem, that should be representative of your experience online as well. So when you visit your profile online, you should see the documents you've followed not only online, but also on premises. So one unique profile to kind of rule them all, in addition to one search to rule them all. We also understand that hybrid's been relatively complex to implement, and that's been one of the biggest challenges. It's anywhere from 5 to 15 TechNet articles, depending on whether or not you're doing search and BCS and a number of other solutions, in addition to all of the prerequisites. And in many cases, if you are successfully able to implement hybrid today through the long array of PowerShell commands you have to run, any mistake is very difficult to get yourself out of. So one of the things that we're investing in is a new scenario picker to effectively provide a better hybrid configuration experience. Think of it as a hybrid configuration wizard. So in this case, it's almost like deployment automation from a hybrid perspective. So it's no longer a bunch of PowerShell commands. You visit a new resource center, much like you would do for Exchange. We'll identify whether or not any prerequisites are necessary for your implementation. If those prerequisites don't exist, we'll go ahead and take care of them for you, and we'll take care of configuration of your hybrid experience as opposed to somebody sitting down and hoping for the best with the 15 pages of PowerShell. So, and the beauty part is if you want to thank the person responsible, they're here in the front row for delivering a bunch of great hybrid experiences, and we have more to share about those coming up. So give it up for Sesha Manny. All right, in the last 8 seconds, this is representative of where we're at with a very early release of SharePoint. So we're still a year away, and we've been able to do all of this in the last couple of months. So just imagine what we're able to do in the next year for you and our customers. To think about it, SharePoint 2016, it's going to be a comprehensive solution for connected information work, and it's going to be the most durable version of SharePoint we've ever shipped to date. The reason is because we look to the cloud to define what SharePoint on-premises is, so it's going to be the most tested version of SharePoint that provides the most quality and reliability and resiliency, and then it's going to be optimized for the way we see people work through an easily managed, what we call integrated platform, which means investments like the project server investments like taking our experience running SharePoint at scale and accruing it back to you. Today's just been a high-level overview of some of those investments that we're making. We still have a year to go, so I'm sure we're going to do some exciting stuff between now and then that we'll be able to share with you as we get closer to the release. Just to recap some of the release timelines, as we move into later this year, we'll offer a public preview of SharePoint 2016 that you'll be able to download and begin to play with some of these investments. Between that and 2016, early 2016, when we ship SharePoint and make it generally available, we'll have another release candidate. If you're a customer interested in our TAP program, I encourage you to go to the Expo Hall and visit the TAP booth there to find out more information about how you can participate in our TAP program, or find this individual in the corner over here holding his hand up who's responsible for that. So if you do want to participate in early builds of SharePoint 2016, I encourage you to talk to them to get involved and provide feedback to us to where we can improve. And then lastly, again, our hybrid search experience for those that can't wait to begin leveraging the Office Graph as part of your on-premises investments. You can expect to see that later this year as part of an update to 2013, as well as just being natively baked into 2016. With that said, I just want to thank everybody for showing up today. If you have any questions, you can find me just about on any social channel, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and I'm glad to answer any questions you may have.